Welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 15, Classical Liberalism. First of all, we all have introduction about the unit. Liberalism is the dominant ideology of the present day Western world. The history of England, Western Europe and America for the last 300 years is closely associated with the evolution and development of liberal thought. Liberalism was the product of the climate of opinion that emerged at the time of the Renaissance and Reformation in Europe. As an ideology and a way of life, it reflected the economic, social, and political aspirations of the rising middle class, which later on became the capitalist class. In the 16th and 17th century, when the feudal system was cracking up, a new political system was taking its place. The establishment of the absolute nation states in England and Europe gave birth to a kind of political system in which the authority of the king was absolute. The beginning of liberalism was a protest against the hierarchical and privileged authority and monarchy, a protest which involved every aspect of life. The main slogan of the protest was freedom, freedom from every authority, which is capable of acting capriciously and arbitrarily, along with freedom of the individual to develop all of his potentialities as a human being endowed with reason. To achieve the liberty of the individual and to challenge the authority of the state, liberalism demanded liberty in every field of life: intellectual, social, religious, cultural, political, and economic, etc. The central problem with which these liberties were concerned is the relationship between the individual and the state. The negative or the classical aspect of liberalism remained dominant for a very long time. The initial aim of liberalism was more destructive than constructive. Its purpose was not to elucidate positive aims of civilization, but to remove hindrances in the path of the development of the individual. Later half of the 19th century, it was a progressive ideology fighting against cruelty, superstitions, intolerance, and arbitrary governments. To fight for the rights of the men of the nations. During the last 100 years, it had to face the challenges of other ideologies and political movements such as democracy, Marxism, socialism, and fascism. It absorbed democracy and socialism to a great extent in the name of the welfare state, fought fascism tooth and nail, but could not overcome Marxism. In the mid 20th century, in the face of Marxism, it became an ideology of status quo, defensive and conservative, even counter revolutionary, out of touch with and usually hostile to the radical and revolutionary movements of the day. However, with the fall of the socialist regimes in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and the withering away of socialist ideology. Classical liberalism, in its new avatar of liberalism, is once again becoming the dominant ideology of the contemporary world. Now, the next topic is what is liberalism? Liberalism is too dynamic and flexible a concept to be contained in a precise definition. Right from its inception, it has been continuously changing, adding something and discarding the others. As Alblastar writes, liberalism should be seen not as a fixed or absolute term, as a collection of unchanging moral and political values, but as a specific historical movement of ideas in the modern era that began with Renaissance and Reformation. It has undergone many changes and requires a historical rather than a static type of analysis. Similarly, Lasky writes it liberalism is not easy to describe, much less of to define, for it is hardly less a habit of mind than a body of doctrine. To quote Hacker's, liberalism has become so common a term in the vocabulary of politics that it is a brave man who will try to give it a precise definition. It is a view of individual, of the state, and of relations between them. Almost the same view is expressed by the Grimms. Liberalism is not a static creed or dogma, for dogmatism provides its own restraints. It is rather a tentative attitude towards social problems, which stresses the role of reason and human ingenuity. Liberalism looks ahead with a flexible approach, seeking to make future better for more people. As, as conservatism looks back, aiming mainly to preserve the attainment of the past. Although the liberal ideas are about 300 years old, the word liberalism did not come into use till the beginning of the 19th century. According to Richard Wilhelm, the liberalism is the belief in the value of liberty of the individual. According to Sartori, very simply, liberalism is the theory and practice of individual liberty, judicially defense, and constitutional state. Bullock and Shaw emphasize the belief in freedom and conscience as the twin foundations of liberalism. Grimm writes, it represents a system of ideas that aim at the realization of the pluralistic society, favoring diversity of politics, economics, religion, and other cultural life. It seeks in its simplest sense to advance the freedom of man. It seeks to increase individuality of man by increasing his area of choice and decision. Similarly, Lasky writes liberalism implies a passion for liberty and that the passion may be compelling it requires a power to be tolerant, even susceptible about opinion and tendencies you hold to be dangerous, which is one of the rarest human qualities. Hallowell defines liberalism as the embodiment of the demand for freedom in every sphere of life: intellectual, social, religious, political, and economic. Scarpio talks of liberalism as an attitude of life: skeptical, experimental, rational, and free. According to Corner, liberalism begins and ends with the ideas of individual freedoms, individual human rights, and individual human happiness. These remain central to the creed, whatever may be the economic and political arrangements of the liberal democracy society. According to Heater, the liberty is the quintessence of liberalism. For the liberal, it is the individual who counts, not society at large or segment of it. For only by placing priority on the rights of the individual can freedom be ensured. Andrew Hackers, in his book Political Theory, has distinguished four types of liberalism, namely utopian liberalism, free market liberalism, democratic liberalism, and reformist liberalism. On the whole, according to him, liberalism stands for free life as the prime pursuit of politics. State's task is to ensure, coercion, and to encourage the conditions for this free life. Similarly, Barbara Godwin, in her book Using Political Ideas, lists the following ingredient of liberalism: man is free, rational, self-improving, and autonomous. Government is based on consent and contract, constitutionalist, and the rule of law. Freedom as choice, which includes the right to choose government from among different representatives. Equality of opportunity, social justice based on merit and tolerance. In short, liberalism has a narrow and a broad perspective. At a narrow level, it is seen from the political and economic points of view, whereas at the broader level, it is like a mental attitude that attempts, in the light of its presuppositions, to analyze and integrate the varied intellectual, moral, religious, social, economic, and political relationships of human beings. At the social level, it stands for secularism, freedom in relation to religion and morality. It lays stress on the value of free individual conscious of his capacity for self-expression and unfettered development of his personality. At the economic level, it implies the ideal of free trade coupled with internal freedom of production. At the political level, it stands for political liberty and the right to property, constitutional limited government, protection of the rights of the individual, and anti-authoritarianism. Now let us know about the characteristics of liberalism. From the above discussion, it is now clear that the liberalism is not merely a political concept, but also a socio-economic, cultural, and ethnic concept. It can be understood through certain characteristics evolved during its long history. John Hallowell has pinpointed the following characteristics of classical liberalism: a belief in the absolute value of human personality and spiritual equality of the individual, a belief in the autonomy of the individual will, a belief in the essential rationality and goodness of man, a belief in certain malleable rights of the individual, particularly rights of life, liberty, and property, that states comes into existence by mutual consent for the purpose of protection of rights, that the relationship between the state and the individual is a contractual one, that social control can best be secured by law rather than command. Individual freedom in all spheres of life: political, economic, social, intellectual, and religious. The government that governs the least is the best. A belief that truth is accessible to man's natural reason. Here we wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.